Joining us now is New York Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin. He's a member of the House Financial Services and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, are you making any predictions about what happens Tuesday, assuming those two bills get brought to the floor?
I'm starting to think that it's more likely that the bills won't end up coming to the floor by Tuesday. The House Rules Committee was going to meet tomorrow to advance this bill, these bills across the finish line. It looks like the House Rules Committee won't be meeting tomorrow. Over the course of the day today, I was hearing that the far left of Congress, led in the Senate by Bernie Sanders, AOC and her friends in the House, they were prioritizing Medicare drug prices, and they might have made progress in being able to get some of the text changed as it relates to that. But the big question is whether or not Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema would be supportive of that bill, because I don't know if the House will be passing the infrastructure bill and passing, you would say, both bills without having that commitment that these bills are going to pass over in the Senate, because once the House passes what's called the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that bill goes to the president's desk. So the progressives want to be sure that this bill that passes the House, the other bill, that when it goes back to the Senate, that's going to pass there too. So there's a few moving parts here. It is possible that there will be a vote on these bills this week. We shall see, but it seems like they're not there yet.
It's interesting. The president begged Democrats in Congress to pass these bills. He says his presidency hinges on their success. And then he heads over to Europe and the climate summit and takes a third of his cabinet with him and kind of doesn't do any lobbying. How do you see that? Is that unusual?
Yeah, he's not a very good closer. I mean, tonight's Game 5 of the World Series. He's not Mariano here. At the end of September, President Biden came to the House. He tried to close the deal. He actually left with less votes on his bill than before he came. Same thing happened at the end of this past week. He came to the House to close the deal, and he left with less votes than he did before he came. Some of the feedback that I got in talking to House Democratic colleagues was that the president was not going into the heart of the details of the bill. He wasn't selling anyone on specifics. He was spending time meandering to other topics off of the bills, and that wasn't instilling confidence in moving the ball forward. The Speaker has been desperately trying to close the deal amongst her members, but it's too close of a margin, and the far left continuing to hold her hostage. They have the votes to block both bills from passing.
Well, if the president had widespread support among the American people, one would think members of Congress would be more attuned to his requests. But according to the latest NBC News poll, the president is not doing so well. Asked whether people approve or disapprove of the job Joe Biden is doing as president, only 18% strongly approve, 24% somewhat approve. That's a total of 42. 46% they say that they strongly disapprove of the job he's doing. And if you add the somewhats, it's 54 to 42. The president is sort of hamstrung here politically, it would seem.
That's right. And we're seeing this in New York, which is a blue state. We're seeing it in places like Virginia, where there's a governor's race coming on Tuesday. That was one of the reasons why the Democrats were trying to get a vote by Tuesday, is that they fear that if Glenn Youngkin wins the gubernatorial race, that they'll have less momentum waking up Wednesday morning to get it passed. You showed those poll numbers. President Biden was asked about those poll numbers today while he was traveling, and he said that's not why he's elected. That's not why he's serving as president, or something to that effect. But those are a reflection of a loss of confidence in competence, as well as where the agenda and priorities are. That's a genuine concern I'm seeing all across, not just red areas of New York, but also blue areas in my travels.
Just 30 seconds left, but I know you've written a letter to the president complaining about his plans to set up a consulate for the Palestinians in Israel.
Well, I'm glad you're asking about that, and I'll tell you here for the first time that this letter is going to be dropping tomorrow morning. It's going to be signed by at least 200 House Republicans. It is opposing the president's potential move of establishing a consul general in Jerusalem. When President Biden was Senator Biden, he was part of a nearly unanimous effort in getting the Jerusalem Embassy Act passed and signed into law, which would say that Jerusalem should be recognized as the capital of Israel. It should be undivided. The Palestinian Authority wants this consulate general office to be open because they want to divide Jerusalem. House Republicans are going to be sending a very strong statement tomorrow morning that we do not oppose dividing Jerusalem as the president's proposing.
New York Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, sir.